and I need to come on here and just document this. Yesterday, the video was talking about how we had finally connected the 3 feminines on the Essene line, which came directly from the United States in New Orleans, right outside of New Orleans, between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, the Evergreen Plantation, which evergreens everywhere in all your scribes. And that family is the Mary Magdalene family and John Baptiste. And on that land and down the street is the church and all the burial crypts. There's one there with Burch, B-U-R-C-H, that shouldn't have been there. And there's a lot of them there that were unmarked. And on the wall is a placard, and it said it's set for the Ascension of 1972. And I have stated it here over and over again, that this ascension should have been announced to the world in July of 1973, and it was all in plan to do so. And then in late 1972, in December, the Rothschilds decided to make a play for it, and they did a massive spell. And this is where Marie Helene Rothschild gets mixed in with my story. And the making of Kristen Renee Genzel. Now, none of this would even need to come out right now. None of this would even need to be said if they hadn't attempted to do it all again in the last 3 years in order to make a last president. Now, realize that a last president in the cleaned codes would end up ruling the world for 1,000 years. And see, even as I'm speaking about this, it's linking me to, well, it doesn't matter. The connection that I made yesterday and realized that whenever you come through Ascension, like I talked about yesterday in the video, that you're going to find out exactly how you were made. You're going to put it all back together. And this last piece of the puzzle linked into the Essene line, which would have been Marianne Truppe. She was Princess de Be, B-E. And they had set up this whole name structure on top of her. De Mil, M-I-L, Dar, D-A-R. And see, this is just like China trying to change the Bible and David and his Bible. And this is linked heavily to David because this is where this all got started. And there's no King David, nothing going down in this world. I can promise you that. David was the problem with his Catherine issue and his making of the Anne Boleyn and the Oxford and all of that spells, because it even played out again in my world in California in 2018 with David Palmer. Because I walked this whole thing. Now, the woman that I finally connected with had made it to Oklahoma, but born in Germany. And there's been another that I had connected to, and there was actually a couple of y'all that parents were involved with the government, and one in particular that was linked to 2018, because 2018 is where this went completely upside down in my world. And it was linked to Port Aransas, just like I talked about yesterday with PG&E, but understand that that connection is directly to Hawaii, and it's the closest connection to Hawaii. And Point Arena ended up being where a ton of Death Spells and Asian Mafia had moved in over there, because there was a lot of Druid temples there, Ascension temples, more like, I mean, you could describe them as like a tornado gate or a spout that was connected into California, but was like a spout of energy that was connected to something much deeper, linked into Shambhala and Inner Earth and Lemuria. This video is titled Making of an AB Negative because it is what it is. I had known that I was made from Martha Genzel's baby that passed away, Alicia Diane. And that baby was a Gough, G-O-U-G-H, and linked into the Remnant Mormon line, which was a really small sect of the Church of Christ faith. And really, it wasn't even Mormon. The remnants didn't go by Mormon. It was Church of Latter-day Saints. And my grandfather was Dan, and then William was Bill, and then those were my uncles, and then my grandfather was Malcolm, Mac. And this ended up being a huge stronghold and linked into Motor City in Detroit and Michigan. And the mafia, in the end. I'm shaking from the inside right now. What I knew from that side is that because the remnant Mormons kept all of the true legitimate names that were down here that were linked into the Saints of Latter Days, because this time was always said to come. And whenever they computerized that, or I don't even know how long ago it happened, but it ended up first in the hands of government and then in the hands of Scientology. In 2017, right after I activated and I planted the earth, my Uncle Dan, which all of them had moved to Missouri. In 2000, they thought the world was going to end, and they moved all of their family and their children to Missouri. And I visited them there way back then. Around 2002, 2001, I guess. Is like, I know I just jumped, but I'm telling one big story and I was always 10 years ahead, the way that they had a lot of us gridded, especially those of us who had Highland. And you're in Washington, so just ground yourself for this. I had known for a while because of the DNA change and what we were doing here and how we were, because my whole goal was just to establish a lineage to put my body back together as Saint Sarah, as per the story, as per scroll, as per Irish heritage, as for even your Corpus Christi, which is why they even took my name, Christy. And so I'm sorry, my head is a little bit all over the place because I'm Uncle Dan, as soon my son and I and Martha went to Missouri because this eclipse that's coming in a couple of weeks, in a few weeks, like in a month, was supposed to hit a couple of years ago to form the X over America, and it was supposed to hit over in Missouri, Jefferson. And that's why I had to be at that location for the eclipse in 2017. And now that is moved down into San Antonio because of the work that I did and because we were just trying to put the genome back together to something that would stabilize for the human race with everything that they had done to the Essene lines and laboratories and the breeding and the baby farming and holding us on the dark side with black magic to create these AB negative lines. Right after I got back from the eclipse, well, when Rex and I and Martha were in the car, there was a tornado that was in front of us. Me and Rex could see it. It's like we were flying through the trees. It's like we were in 5D in a way that I've never, ever experienced since, as we were traveling through there, and I knew, and we were claiming and commanding for the waters to start healing everybody because I'd replanted Earth. And I had won this hotel room trip. Won it, right? Just out of the blue. And so we ended up staying at this hotel right next to the Ozarks. And when we pulled up, the three crosses were right there in front. And they even say this is a traveler hotel and all this mess. And right there is when a lot happened with the ascension and the gridding of the ascension. Now I know. And I have documentation of all this. All of it. Me and Rex ended up going to eat without Martha, and I looked over at the brochure stand and ended up finding Fairy Cave. And I knew we had to go, and it was 8 miles deep. And they found it a long time ago because a rabbit had jumped into a hole, and when the miners went to go find it, it just kept going and going, and there's an angel that is tied into the earth. And there, even down in there, was a king's chamber and like a throne room, they called it. And I was taking pictures, and everything in the cave was coming to life, and I just started crying, and I knew. I kept telling her, I'm going to free you, I'm going to free you. And I know now that that was linked to all of us in the Essene line. And this even goes back into the story of Inanna and Dimitri, which ended up walking out in my world with this Elaine that I described the other day about the airplanes and the lines. But again, another made AB negative, but more so from Jew. Right after we came home, Uncle Dan passed, and I passed him over. And I ended up passing over his wife, Mary. And that's whenever I figured out that I really wasn't totally adopted, even though that man, Joseph, that tracked me my whole life. Almost like that show, Dear Child, like he's in my head. But I don't think he's been in there for a while, FYI. But for a while is really, really strong. when Uncle Dan passed away, because there's 80 acres right there that they called Zion, and it's pure land. And it's supposed to be given to me in order to help the people at some point. And this beam of light appeared over it, and it prophesied, and it was on everything that the religion had ever had pictures of about Zion. And it's like I showed everybody, and it's like nobody cared. No one. I don't know. I don't know why they don't get it. But even then, in 2017, the Kaufmans, which is a name that's gridded down here around me, that all have all these children, and even Gala Street is a name. These farmers, and they could tell that the sun had flipped to the wrong side. And they were telling people that at the funeral, but I don't know. I don't know why nobody ever did anything. I'm saying all that because I want everybody to understand that what I'm going to start talking about next is linked into the true Yahshua Essene DNA lines that were set for ascension here, that were linked into your 144,000 angels, that were linked into the branch of the tree of life down in Shambhala, linked into the Egyptian tombs, the Queen's pyramids, the reason that Egypt and Giza and all of that even was ever built and made. And then how through mummification of the Egyptian lines and then the carrying on with it with the Essene lines ended up making Shambhala the tree of life and all that we have, that, and the reason that we're living now, and that we have bodies in this place and space linked to 4004 BC, AD, and 404 CE. And then a whole bunch of laboratories. There was a dewdrop spell. And I even found the spell. I've got a picture of it. It was on the internet. And if I remember correctly, I found it in August 2021. Now, in August 2021, what had happened in my world is I was traveling with a Michelle, and I have Michelles around me in my story like crazy, and they are linked to Michelle Obama 100. This one I called Amisha just so I could tell them apart. And this all went down in Hermosa, right up the street from the beach. And it's a street that whenever you look at it from masonry, it looks like a angled scythe. Almost like, I'm seeing it in my head, and if you have telepathy, I'll send a picture. It's like a long pole, and if that long pole curves up to the left, and then instead of going over like a scythe and like a moon, it has a straight anchor straight across, you know, like how you would put something in something to turn it. And that street had been cut in Hermosa. It should have been straight and go up into the core right there, but instead it had been cut, and we were right on the other side of that. And that's where our journey had ended, and Misha and I had been all over the United States, and she had brought me and drew me in with blood magic, and she had even told me about it, and this was the Garner line. And that we even found that Garner line on the Mary Magdalene tomb in New Orleans when we finally ended up there. And even Misha went missing out the back. And it's like the Garners always were handing over and going and finding through Vatican faith and Catholicism and Spanish and Hispanic and Mexican lines. It's like they were being bred in order to track us. Now, she even knew that, and her mother passed away in the middle of all of this. And also, you know, it isn't all on Misha as well, because Misha did do a huge sacrifice for the collective and channeling in that Ophiuchus ray, which did bring in an Ophiuchian demon, because you can't channel in those dimensions and not bring in that DNA. And we did a lot of positive things with that, but my point in all this is that it was written, and by the time July 2021 had rolled around, we had already been all over the United States. And where it went wrong with us is in Myrtle Beach. And this was the first time that the government tried to take my son, but I had showed up to the Zoom call, and somehow or another, it just went away that they were going to try to take him, which they ended up doing the following year. And we were always trying to get people to us, because I knew that as soon as I'm in the vicinity and even have a 5-minute conversation or in the same room with the right DNA, what it does is it seals it to where there can't be any mimics. And this is actually when Henry Cavill was trying to get to me, and supposedly, and his mother Mary Ann. And no matter what had happened with that story and with the link into it with Scientology, I knew that because them putting in the Henry mimic into my story, no matter if it was a real one or not, ended up bringing down the monarchy. All of them. And Mary Ann Cavill, his mother, was the name of Mary Ann, which is Yahshua's and Sarah Damaris's mother per scroll. And I believe it is who I found the real one yesterday, which is why all of this story is even opening up to me today. When I finally got there, Misha had these voices that were building in her head worse and worse and worse, and me and her I knew that she's working against me, but I also, after the fact, knew that because it was deleting from me, and just because of universal law, that basically she had taken over that role, and I knew that something else was controlling her. And so I went into a period of, right before I split from her and had to jump and leave, seclusion. And during that time, what ended up happening was, it was a group of young girls. One name was Claire. She's the one who entered in. And she had a group of 4 to 5 that were all in their 20s. And let me tell you, their power and their witchcraft was something I had never seen before. And the reason I have to bring this up is because in that grouping, I knew that I had found the template of Onassis, Jacqueline. Now, I don't know why Claire did it, but what Claire did was break open the Y chromosome and put it in a safe. And she did it right in front of me. And so what ended up happening then is I was leaving, and I had to literally escape. And I had to plan out how I was going to get out of there without Misha knowing. And on the morning that happened, and I was heading back to Texas, and I mean it's 9 o'clock in the morning. It was earlier, and I had been set up by a guy named Ricky in California. I had met him through this Carlos Lotfipor, which they called Ari, which is pinnacle to this story, and is linked into the mob and the mafia in Saudi Arabia, and Zulin and Braun and Trump and NASA and ASP and London. I mean, all of it. Those characters had come into my story before I met Misha back in 2019. And that character came in the story, and at that point I thought, that the government was working with us, because they always should have. None of this needed to happen. I met him at the Oasis in October 2019 in Las Vegas, because I had claimed Las Vegas in 2018. And now I know that the Binion family and basically all the mobsters and the suitcases that were always being delivered to Las Vegas were linked into the Essene DNA and whoever was harvesting it, and that is what they were always bringing. And just like that suitcase and that person would get an escort into Las Vegas, is how I was entering into Vegas in the ethers, all the way down to lines of cars that were showing up in front of me to lead me in. And in 2018, I spent a lot of time with the family, and her name was Christina, and a girl named Paige there that I knew were getting paid in order to harness energy. And we were even on, this had to do with Odin and the Vikings as well. And I don't know why I jumped there, because it's all linked in. But back to Hermosa, as I was leaving that day, it's Ricky. It was this guy named Ricky and a green screen. That's why I started talking about it, because the main thing that Ricky did was get me in front of a green screen in 2020 when I was back in LA and traveling with Fernando, which ended up getting sawed into a suitcase and murdered in another country, connected into Bit, at least the name of him, Fernando, because when me and Fernando finally parted, I never talked to him again, and I knew something bad had happened. But Fernando and I were also utilized with NASA, used us to bring in the Dragon. I mean, we were driving on the highway when they were landing it at the same fucking moment, and it was on the radio, and I knew that they were utilizing us somehow to bring in and port in something, and we were in Arizona. And I know I'm jumping all over the place, but that's how this story rides, because it's basically 4 years was all 1 year. And maybe even 4 days. Fernando had been snuck across the border in Mexico on the day of 9/11 under a false ID when he's just a child. And Fernando had grown up seeing a lot of animals being mutilated and things like that, and he was one of us, and I knew that he was linked into the hidden princess Egyptian sarcophagus that we had in Egypt that not many knew about, that basically was like a Mona Lisa sarcophagus. It was made to change gender. Fernando was with me in 2020 when I paid $3,000 to go meet Jason Momoa because I knew that he was the one that we had made. I knew that his line. I always had Henry Cavill and Jason Momoa in my story because that's how Hollywood had bound us. And to me, those two characters were not who they are. To me, throughout the entire DNA healing and the lines, what those characters represented to me were large masses of people and consciousness. Henry being from like the star people, and Momoa being from the red root race and the ground people. And both of them somehow even ended up in the DNA of my son because he was made by a Cohen doctor. I know I'm jumping all over the place because I haven't even got to the new information. I did everything I could in order to merge with Momoa, even to get in a room with him for 5 minutes because he was attached to so many people. And I knew that if I could get to him, that it was going to save 2 billion lives. But they used it all against me in such a horrible, horrible ways. And Fernando and I left to go meet him, and we were packed for 2 days. And at the same exact moment, somebody had tricked my son, Rex, and it befriended him in Austin. And at the time, he is only 12 or 13, and invited him to a birthday party in Austin, which later we found out that he got all the way there and there wasn't even a party. But it ended up that me and Fernando and Christopher, which is in the Kennedy story, the name linked to Jacqueline, which is Jack-o'-lantern, which is also linked into October 31st, which was Maria Orsick's birthday. And I got there, and we stayed at the Line Hotel on Lady Bird Lake. And on the side of the hotel was literally Wonder Woman with a huge mural breaking free of binds on her wrists. And Fernando was very powerful, and Fernando had put up a wall right there on the corner because we had already gotten kicked out of LA because of this Ricky character in this green screen and how that was linked to Epstein. And even Natalia in the Croft apartments where they had me healing all these lines. And Ricky had a group of women that he supposedly was helping getting out of prostitution. And he had led us, I'm back in California at the green screen event because the event that we were at, they got us to the green screen facility in disguise that we were helping these women get out of prostitution. But then what they had was a bunch of women on the screen that were in prostitution. And then this one woman dressed in this red outfit that looked like from the early 1800s on the green screen. And then that night, we all went to dinner and everything went really weird. And the name Oscar Garcia and Steve Garcia is linked into this heavily. And Oscar Garcia, you're going to fucking hell and you're going to jail because I'm gonna fucking find you. When we got to the dinner, they had a little girl that had the same birthday as me, October 7th, which now I know is the clone date that's linked to Russia and Putin and the Spider program.
And they made sure to serve her pineapple juice that night. And they were trying to like act like they were highballing it and had all this money. And then Steve Garcia comes up, and he's supposedly a musician, and he's even out there on Instagram. But my God, he looked just like Ari. Just like him. And Ari called himself Ari, but his name was Carlos, and he was an astrophysicist. That they had put into my story at the Oasis in Las Vegas in 2019. And at that table, Ricky, at the end of the table, had made a comment about the green screen. And at that point, I looked up at him and I said, yeah, and you can make anybody look like they're the president too. And everything changed at that moment when I made that comment. And he ended up being rude to me, making me cry. And then whenever me and Fernando went back to the Airbnb, which was a house that other people were in, we were locked out. We were locked out. We couldn't get in. There were people at the house. We were honking. We couldn't get in the house. We ended up having to call Airbnb, and they paid for us a hotel room in downtown LA because we were in downtown LA locked out. And this was all the black magic that they were doing in order to get us on certain grid systems. So that next day is when Fernando and I came back to Texas, and then that leads up to the part of us going to Austin to have this meeting where they also lured my son and my ex-husband at the same time. So whenever I got to the hotel, and I thought I was going to meet him, but I wasn't really sure because this was all such a fucking mess. And, you know, I got dressed up to go meet him. And they had me meeting him at the Four Seasons. Well, when I get to the Four Seasons, I had to make sure to make a purchase so that it was documented that I was there. And then, of course, he did not show up, but there was a meeting going on. 2 men up there. And I knew that somebody was in that hotel room and that there was sex going on in that hotel room. And it was somehow binding me to something. And when I finally left, because I got a hold of the being that it was this Joseph character, and this is some type of sorcerer is what he was, because this is how I ended up having to prove sorcerer to even get away from it. He said that he had been knighted by the Galactic Council for telling him that the world was going to blow up. Well, what he didn't tell y'all is that he blew up the world. And it was because Fernando and I, right before we made it to California, had to go to Sturgis. And I had to drive the Black Mountains because they had put me as the Reaper Girl, which meant that they had bound me to all sexual energy. And basically, we're going to go make me fuck all of their mobsters and gangsters. But I was your Christ. I was Mary Magdalene. I was your Neurosine. And so on the way in the car up the Black Mountains, when I just left Old McDonald's farm, which is a bee farm, and the only reason that we were heading to Sturgis is because Old McDonald come up to me while I was there in that cylinder, because I was in a cylinder. And Raw had come out of me when 2 children and some children were found in Lebanon in a shipping container. And Old McDonald came up and told me I looked just like his daughter, but I was prettier and I seemed to be smarter. But his daughter looked like Reese Witherspoon. And he didn't know how, but somehow or another, she lucked into this $1.5 million real estate deal. And yeah, she's at Sturgis. And that's when I called Fernando and I go, hey, Fernando, want to go to Sturgis? And she found me there. She found me there with her boyfriend. And all these Trump weird stuff all over the place is bizarre. Same stuff that you're seeing now. His face on a biker, tatted and all. Fernando and I didn't go home for 44 days. I couldn't leave. We had only packed for 2. But whatever they had done, what I had to do then was go to the Alamo again. Go to Arizona again. And then actually, everything I just said about Sturgis and all that I'm remembering came after the fact. The Austin trip came first. Then we had to go to Sturgis. Then we had to go to Queens Valley, Arizona, which then they labeled Gold Mountain, and a Queen's Pyramid, Egyptian pyramid was there. And this was where we found the Mormons. And the one of us that was linked into the Dragon Line and Sarah, where she was showing me that the Mormons were still having the girls do 25 pin pokes on their fingers and toes, and they were binding all of them into the earth. Now I say all of that because it was all linked up into Lionsgate in California and Desert Palms. And Ricky appeared again later on at the Desert Palm at Oasis, where Anna Nicole used to go. And then that's where they tried to do a remummification of me and Misha at the same time as a child. And we had undone that mummification that they tried to do on me because they'd had us both in there at the same time. And as they were doing it, I remembered the twins that were in the Egyptian pyramid, and I thought, oh shit, this is how the Gemini twins got formed, because they mummified children who didn't have any consciousness of the mummification. Because all of us that were mummified knew exactly what every element was being used. Every element was matched inside of our tomb, because upon resurrection, and whenever those items show up, and that is how you're supposed to put the story back together. And so basically what I had done during that time is reconsciously be mummified, but consciously, and as a child, a baby. This is fucking nuts. I'm going to go back to Myrtle Beach because this has to do with Black Rock and how this Natalie appeared in Henry's world. They made us pay. We had paid again. Misha had gotten $150,000 from her husband's death, Freddie, who was killed by a bobcat, literally. A tractor in her world, but I think in another timeline, truly a bobcat. And that's how we were able to have the money to travel, but she was just spending it like water. And also I know that we were setting that up because we had to be with these high-end people in order to get free. And we also were setting up timelines to where all of us had everything that we had, and we always did have, I should have always had money. But that's how we were able to travel and do everything that we did up to the point where I separated with her from Hermosa. When we paid Henry to come, her baby girl flew down the stairs the night before, was thrown down the stairs from some entity, and we knew we had to get the fuck out of there. And so we packed up a night early and we left, and I knew we had to go straight to New Orleans. And whenever we got there in New Orleans, we stayed on the outside of the business district first for a few days. And it's when I started realizing what was going on there, because it wasn't like a vampire hold. It wasn't like a wolf hold. It was some type of chemical based something that was giving these people this power, like succubus groups. And most of them were African American. They were on crotch rocket bikes, and they were traveling in packs. But when we moved into the quarter on Dauphine Street, this guy named Ace showed up. It started pouring down rain, and this guy named Ace showed up, and he ended up being linked into voodoo. And I didn't know that at the time, but I really couldn't, not do anything because I had to walk the whole thing. And what happened was we ended up walking on Bourbon Street that night, and I healed 2 people. One immediately came out of a vampire team. And as I put his heart back in him, he started screaming, "I know they got me. I knew they got me in the woods. I knew they fucking got me." And then another guy named Kevin, which happened to be her son's name, who had some Misha's son who was 18, 19, and the Illuminati was in his head, and he had a bunch of issues growing up, and we knew that we were always healing these male lines from all this bullshit. And what ended up happening is I got back to the Dauphine, and I was telling Misha, "Oh my God, this is where we're supposed to be." The healings I just did, and the people were with me, and then a New Orleans police officer showed up. And he walked right past us, and he went into the corridor, and then I was telling her the story, and then all of a sudden it was like I had a vice on my head, and I put my hand up to her. I said, "Stop." Light language started coming in. I only said a few verses, and then I looked at her and I said, "I already got him, but I'm going all the way." And then I did about another minute of light language, and that's when I saw the cauldron and the depths of the cauldron. And then immediately it's like I had an eagle eye view, and I could see a man running down the stairs, and son of a bitch if that guy didn't walk back out. And then the very next day, then I'm sitting in the same spot where that conversation had happened, and 2 20-something white boys show up saying that they lost their gun. They were looking all in the chair where Misha was sitting the night before, and they said, "We lost our gun, we lost our gun." And one of the things that had always been in my head was, and I didn't know why, was that I was supposed to give AJ back the gun. Give AJ back the gun. Well, my adopted dad's name is Al William James Genzel, and Rex's middle name is James. And then throughout my story, I had a whole bunch of AJs, and then in my consciousness, I had given him back the gun. But then at many points, I was like, I took that bitch back, and I still am not for sure what that is. But I think it's linked to Kennedy now. So I say all of that because whenever I finally was leaving Hermosa that morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, and my plan was to get back to Texas and just where I wanted, because I just wanted to be safe, Ricky had led me down to the pier, and right before Ricky showed up, I had met these 2 guys from Alabama. They was both 6'2". They looked almost exactly the same, and they both had the same name. I can't remember their name right now. And I had gotten their phone number, and we were supposed to meet up. Well, at 9 o'clock in the morning, as I'm leaving that hotel, he calls me to stop by. And see, the way that this worked is like you can't say no. And also you have to rewalk the story. So I ended up there on Osage Drive, 101, with these 2 6'2" Alabama black guys. That then is when I found out that he worked for the Department of Justice. And while I was there, he wanted me to clip his fingernails. And so he goes up and gets a packet of fingernail stuff that's metal. And now I know what they's doing was fingerprinting me. And then they make me watch a Netflix movie about a vampire on a plane with their son. And then the plane gets taken over. She goes into full vamp mode. She kills everybody on the thing. Her son escapes, and then they all die. And that's what they made me watch. That's how I ended up at the King House. The first time in August 2021 in Anaheim, where they were doing all this Lionsgate spells on all of us in order to hold that portal. And in order to continue moving nothing but the dark side through it without any consciousness. But that in 2021 is when the collective brought through that lion's cub. That ancient lion's cub through the portal, which is what we ended up utilizing for me and all of us to go raw the next year. Because, of course, I ended up back there last year in August. Because it is all one giant thing. Now, I say all of that because they had done a dewdrop spell on Texas and Oklahoma. And whenever I got back in August 2022 to Texas, after I had gone raw and after the Colombians had done what they did to me at Hermosa Pier, which that Joseph character ended up admitting to setting me up with Kendall Kardashian, setting me up with the Colombian cartel drug run. And what they tried to do was possess me. And they even had a man there that was a demonologist that I had done a healing on, but I didn't know that's what he was, that was staying in that hostel with me. And then there was a guy there named Louie. And this is how this is linked to Catherine and Charlotte and Louie. Louie was from France, and he was down here on a year sabbatical. And France had a techno rave group that for the first time was going to do one in the United States. And that's what he was going to. And it was on Olive Street. Now, that area in downtown LA is also linked to the Pegasus building, which I had been to twice throughout all of this, with a man named Marcus. And Marcus was linked to Venice, and he was an African-American guy that is a frazzle drip. I even saw his face. And Pegasus building is on 6th Street in LA. And all the Pegasus buildings are linked into the Mobil from ExxonMobil. They're linked into Mobil. Every single Mobil building is called Pegasus. And it was all linked into the ExxonMobil spells and the Russians and everything that went on in the 2000s and why they had me always around ExxonMobil. My whole life I've been around ExxonMobil. My whole existence. My grandfather, Malcolm B. Goff, ran the Exxon station in Bryan, Texas, and I literally grew up at a service station running the till in the front since I was 8 years old. Give me a second, because I'm trying to see where I'm supposed to go with this next. There's just so much. I was at the hostel, and I was sitting up in the window, because the reason I had to be at that hostel is the only hostel I've ever stayed at, and I never was homeless, ever, which is what the court system said that I was when they took my son, but I never was homeless. In fact, I was staying in hotels and stuff all over the world, manifesting. But I had to stay at that hostel because it was the original hotel on that pier and is really old. And our family lines, I believe, was where we all came in at one point because we found their pictures everywhere. And Hermosa is really special to me. But that hotel, man, is above this bar, restaurant, Irish, I believe. No, it's called Waterman's. And so there's windows up there, and I was sitting on the windowsill this night, and I hadn't met Louis yet, and this drunk guy that wasn't staying at the hostel named Jason comes up into the hostel, and he's fucking with me. And I had just thrown a buffalo coin out the window. I'd just thrown one out there. And that's how the ancestors and how everything was always shown to me. And that's why I move things and do things weird, because then something will happen and it shows me why it's there. And so Jason was up and he was getting really close and he's getting hostile towards me. And then all of a sudden Louis appeared. And he came and sat next to me on the windowsill. And he got Jason to back off, and I knew that he saved me from flying out the window. Because I knew in another timeline they had pushed me out the window. And then that's where right after that is where that whole story with Francis Bacon. And if you go look it up, there's a woman that was a dancer like I was, and she did nude dancing. And she always claimed to be gay because it's back in the old days, and her mother just told everyone she's gay so that the men would leave her alone. But she was like a Marilyn Monroe character. And she ended up jumping out of a 3-story window and dying. But even how it happened, it wasn't possible that she could have died. And it was all linked to this Los Angeles fake art. And everything to do with art and bacon and I don't know. It's some bullshit timeline that they were able to tie everything up into the Essene line for a really long time. And we were undoing it. And we were stopping the last possession of our men. And so what ended up happening was I got thrown out of the hostel. They didn't want me there anymore because the night that they kicked me out, they had moved in a bunch of Colombian cartel people and everybody in the place was doing cocaine. And so they didn't want me there anymore and even the demonologist saw it. He was like, oh my God, I know what they're doing to you. And I didn't have any money. And so he drove me. Well, I got my own car, thank God. And he was supposed to take me per the story to Motel 6, but it was full, thank God. And then on the way, right there by the SpaceX buildings on, not Compton, what was the street that it's on? But it's not Compton, but I can't remember the street name right now, but it's right down the street from SpaceX, and it's like Compton type area. There was an Indian hotel that was all colored in KOU 32, and that's where he ended up taking me. And he paid for 3 nights. It was $300, which ended up coming back as the way we ended up getting out of the St. Helene in the 3 nights in August that we just pulled out of there. And as soon as I got there, I had to go to the food truck that was around the corner because I was hungry. And the Mayan biker gang was there. And I was in shock by the time I got there. And Louis was still at the hostel and he was going to go to this rave. And my plan was to go with him. And this is right after Elizabeth had died, and that even all went down on Hermosa, and I was linked into that, how the night that she died. And I just wanted it to be over. And so it's like I even knew and told Louis, there's going to be some people there and I'm just going to activate the shit out of them. Like, just take me to this fucking rave and I'm going to activate the shit out of all of them because I just need this to be over. And that rave ended up being on Olive Street, which is right where I was telling you, on 6th Street. And all that in downtown LA by the Pegasus building. Like, it was all lined up. And I ended up not going, but keeping the hula hoop above the bed behind on my headboard like it was a portal. And I knew that somehow that guy Louis, which we spent one day together, and it was really special to me because it's like we were just both pure spirits and pure souls, and he was nice to me, which no men are ever nice to me in my life because I was always in this fucked up black magic spell since birth. But then I even realized that it's like we were the pure souls on the dark side that they were about to do something to. And I don't know if they did anything to him or what happened because I really didn't talk to him after that. But what I did know is that we stopped the last possession. Because I had already gone raw. They took my son throughout all of that while I was there. It's why I couldn't come home yet. And the government knew that. They knew, and they were trying to get me to come back here in order to fight for my son. It's why I just had to let go of him, because I knew if I didn't get out, that there's no way anybody else could get out. And so when I got back here in October, I wasn't even welcome in the home here. I disconnected from the program, and Martha was getting really physical with me, and because they were, both of them were taking over. I've done healing zone on them, and since then, because I had to heal them in order to get all out, but still it's been a battle because of the way that they had been controlling these lines. And Martha came from the Goff line, and that entire Goff line was templates of presidents and first ladies. The entire remnant of Latter-day Saints line had been and become templates for all presidents and first ladies. And the Genzel line was connected to the Heisler line, connected into the Hitler line, and had always been the ones that at one point had kidnapped me from Czechoslovakia and brought me down into the States. Which is even what ended up that Puerto Rico part that I was talking about, and the woman that I met that was on that Druid temple, because her father was fired from the CIA from helping a woman escape from Germany. Because this has just been going on for so long. And that story even lines up to the woman that we merged with yesterday that was living in Oklahoma. So whenever I get back, and that night that Martha came at me, I was looking for a gun. I wanted to kill myself. I couldn't find one. And so I got a cane, and I was just hitting myself in the head with that cane. And now I know, because my son ended up getting 2 concussions in hockey right after it, and so many of y'all have had head wounds. But we really did have to reprogram the human brain in order to get us out of this because of the manipulation that was done in the laboratories. And so what I had done was basically beat myself in the head in order to basically knock something free. And a lot of you have had head wounds and concussions, and that's why. And so I had to take off to Oklahoma. because there was only one person that was close. She had a trailer. She didn't even have running water. And she was one of us on a pure side. And she had been working with me. But whenever I got there and I met her children and I saw what they had done to her, she had psilocybin in her energy so bad, and this was linked into this dewdrop spell and what they had done to Oklahoma. And then it ended up that the trailer that was next to it was all set up like an Amber Heard cookhouse, and they had hundreds of pictures of children in that trailer, and these dicks drawn all over the walls, and there was some horrible stuff that had been going on in there right next to her trailer. And I knew that at one point that was actually one property. Her trailer and the trailer that was next door was one property. And she had even said that the police had come months before and that they were crawling underneath the house and they didn't know why. And we took pictures of all of it. But I knew that the police were involved in Oklahoma, and I just knew I needed to get out of there. Within a week of me leaving there is when the house explosions and stuff happened over by Birch Street and Galveston Street in Oklahoma, where they had said that they had 6 bodies, and they tried to say there were 6 children in the house, but everybody only saw 2 body bags coming out. And so I knew I was right. It was linked into this dewdrop spell in Texas that had everything to do with the killing of Kennedy and the mafia. The beautiful woman that I met, she had ordered a chart, the first one in probably about 8 or 9 months, maybe even longer. And yesterday at 2, I think it was 2:15. It was all of a sudden I knew I needed to pull her chart right then, and it was this new moon that was lining up on her Mars. And then whenever I started going through her chart with her and telling her about it, and that's when I realized, oh my gosh, like, basically, first I started calling her Mom, because she had all the Syrian and Cancer energy, and then her Jupiter was in Alpha Draconic 44 in the 12th house, and I knew that we were merging the masculine lines from all what you'd call the mermaid lines, but those are the ones that were made by biologists, bound into fish, bound underneath, bound at the core, bound into Shambhala, bound into the birds, bound into Antarctica, all that bullshit that's been going on down here for so fucking long. And she has a plot of land, and she said, I think there's a portal on it. Well, with everything that I knew, I was like, yeah, definitely, and I think I'm the one who opened it, so let's close it. She said there's these people that moved in next door, and they're going out every night, and they're doing some weird shit in the woods. And I was like, oh my God, that's probably why I'm still got all this stuff around here, around me. And that's why even linked to Hall Office Park and the black magic that they's doing. And so I told her to take something out there that had eyes on it, like a stuffed animal or something, put eyes on it. And I know that I'd get the download. And I ended up going to sleep last night at 10 o'clock, and I ended up leaving the window cracked, which I never do. And so she's not very far from me. And all night long, all I kept seeing was, and hearing was Jack, 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 like over and over and over. And we even called the jackets on the website Kojaks, and I knew there's 3 of them that are up there. And if you go to the Cohute 32 website, I'm telling you, every piece of clothing that's up there is somehow involved into this story and how we named it. So there must have been 3 Kojaks. And so I woke up going, oh my God, because I knew Donald Trump somehow had taken over Malcolm B. Goff's Avatar. I've known that for a while. But what I woke up seeing was the link into Jacqueline Kennedy. And whenever I messaged Mim and told her, hey, this is what I'm seeing, she's always able to find the documentation. And so she finds these pictures that were sold of Jacqueline after when she married Ari Onassis, which I didn't even know that was his name. And they were on Scorpius Island in Greece, which is why the damn thing's flooding right now. And they had sold the naked pictures of her. And then there's all the names, Christina and Catherine and Ari, and then Christopher, and these men who sold the pictures, and Playmen, which is what they called it back then, evidently. I didn't know until today. And then, which ended up being Playboy. But then they were selling these pictures and moving money in from dimension to dimension, just like they're doing in Las Vegas right now, and just like they've been doing with these supposed ransoms. It's bullshit. All they're doing is moving money from one dimension to another right in front of you as the simulation is folding, because they know it. And so these pictures were sold of her, and then one of the children died. Ari, one of his children. And this is also linked into Dodi Fayed, but the main Fayed that just died, because basically whatever was done with the Kennedys had set up that Fayed family, and then they just did the same fucking thing with the royal crown, and that's how it ended up going into Diana Stewart and into the royal lines and infiltrating them, is what I'm telling you. But then it was the kicker, because Mim found that John and Jackie had a baby that died at 5.5 weeks. It was premature. 5.5 months, I guess. And named Patrick. Well, Patrick was a character who's like this weird time travel character. He's always drunk. He was every time he showed up, and he looked the same to me. And both times in 2012, when I first started activating, when I had the company, he showed up right when I had put in, because the Huffington Post had come out with the competition called How to Put America Back to Work. And I knew exactly how to put America back to work, because it's been what I've been doing since 96. And I was even partnered with Hope's Door here in Dallas, which is a charity that was helping battered women. And I would go there and volunteer and teach the women how to interview and set up resumes to get jobs. And Splash Media had let me use their television studio, and we had gone in and done this huge campaign and sent it into Huffington Post. And within a month, some entity was jumping into Mark, which was my handler, and tried to kill me. Locked me in the house. September 21st. It happened at September 22nd. At midnight is when he changed. Shortly after that, my company was stolen. Shortly after that, I lost my house. Shortly after that is like everything started happening, and it was all on Del Largo, which was linked to Mar-Largo. And it's where I ended up planting the new earth. It's where the portal and the pool opened up. And that house ended up being bought by the Holmes, Holmes. Not to mention, there was a kid who shot himself in the head 2 doors down, because they were always killing people around me in order to try to get entities to take over my body. Because I was always made, when people died, I took their consciousness. That's what Oz made. They made me with all the royal lines so that every time somebody died, I'd take their consciousness. And then nobody ever knew about me. So then they were just always doing this shit to me in order to hurt all of you. Patrick ended up in my world in 2012. He was linked to Spider-Man and the dummy of Spider, the guy who did the stunt double in Spider-Man, who's now dead. Patrick's family moved around me, and they were evil. They were. In my world, they were. And then in the desert in Joshua Tree, whenever my tooth split open on Ari's birthday, 2020, he appeared again. Looked exactly the same. Exactly the same. And that whole thing that went down out there, those guys even almost killed him that night. And then within 24 hours is when guns were pulled out in the desert. We were all in the RV. And we ended up flipping into another dimension. Me and the guy, Austin. Ari was in the middle of it. Always. He was always right there in the middle of it, but like watching as a voyeur. And I don't want to get into that right now, but yeah, we even saw, because it was linked to, because I was rewalking the lines, and it was linked to King Edward and the Stolen Queen, because that was always what every bank was always collateralized off of, was the stolen queens from the other countries that had been trapped down here in the United States. Now, I say all that because 2018, see, I did healings in 2018 that the government didn't know about. Me and Rex had already cleaned the Alamo in 2018. That's why it was so easy to take it back. And I had already been in Corpus Christi and Port Aransas in 2018. But even when I was there in 2018, it was like everything was shut down. And now I know it's because it was mimicking 2020. Because in Corpus Christi, the Federal Reserve is right there at a building pointing straight to the ocean. And it's on a ley line. And we came to take it down. That's why Selena was killed there. As I was leaving Corpus Christi, there's a cemetery that's gridded down by the Vatican. And I was, at that point in time, I was always having to clear these damn cemeteries. And this one Pacific cemetery has everything laid out in an alphabet plot. And that's where I found the 2 graves that they called Baby Bot. And there were 2 of us that were buried there as infants. And they just had Baby Bot. And those 2 burials are linked to the mummies that they brought out from Mexico just this week. I knew that I was made from Alicia Diane and a boy. Well, this morning I woke up knowing it was Patrick Kennedy. And then I always knew that Marilyn Monroe was pregnant. And that's why they took her out. And then that's why they took her in the barn. And that's why the red barn door. And that's why so many of us from the dark side always were trapped in that lab with that fucking barn door. I don't know where this is supposed to go, and I don't even care anymore. It just has to stop. No more. No more death. No more mutilation. No more laboratory fuckery. No more black magic. No more spells. No more grinning. No more mushroom clouds. No more vacuums. No more lies.